Hello everyone and welcome to Kaplan's PSAT Scores Are Back Now What event. My name is Beth Hoffberg and I am just one of the PSAT, ACT, and SAT experts that we have here to help you today. I'm joined in the chat by Heather, Joe, Julia, and Sasha. They're going to be able to reach out to you and answer any questions that you have along the way, so definitely chat with us. We really want to make this event as helpful for you as possible. That's a little bit about us. We want to get to know you as well, so if you haven't already voted in the poll, please do so. We want to see what year in school your students are, and then we're going to try to tailor this event to you all. It looks like so far we've got over half of you are parents or guardians of sophomores, or maybe some of you are actually sophomores yourself, which is awesome. And then we've got lots of junior students, lots of freshmen, teeny amount of seniors as well. Welcome to everybody. No matter when you are or what year in school you are and when you're planning to go to college, we are ready to help you today. So definitely keep those questions coming. Well, let's talk about what we're going to do today. Kaplan has a method for everything. We have all of our strategies to succeed on every test that we teach, and so of course we also have a method and a plan for how to go from your PSAT to college admissions. So we are going to tackle this 5-step path today. We'll focus a lot on understanding the PSAT score report. We'll talk a long time about how to determine whether the ACT or SAT is best for you or for your student, because it's really important to make the right decision on that. Then we'll help you make a test prep plan so that your student can get a higher score and be as competitive as possible for college admissions. Now, these 2 steps we'll touch on briefly. We won't actually do them today, so don't worry, you're not going to take an official ACT or SAT, but that is certainly part of the plan, and then apply to colleges, which we also won't do today, but we will touch on them briefly as we go through this journey from the PSAT to college admissions. Let's just take a look at this another way and apply this to a timeline from sophomore year through 12th grade. So if you're a parent or you're a freshman, a parent of a freshman, or you're a freshman, you have a head start. You know exactly what you need to do starting for next year. You can even get started on the 10th grade plan now. If you're a parent of a sophomore or you're a sophomore yourself, you will be ready to do the 10th grade plan. And don't worry if you're a junior or a senior or a parent of a junior or a senior and you didn't do all of these steps before. That's okay. Like, you're going to just start where you are and we'll get you going forward. So you can see that for our sophomores and potentially for freshmen, depending on where you live, you could have taken the PSAT. The PSAT is offered in October every year, and that's the only time actually that it's offered, is only in October. And then starting in 10th grade and potentially even sooner, if you want, is you can start exploring the ACT and the SAT and start to kind of figure out which tests you might have a greater affinity for, and then you can start to work towards that. Now, in 11th grade, for our juniors, that's when you really want to study for the PSAT. And the reason that you really want to study for the PSAT for junior year is because junior year is the only year that PSAT scores count towards national merit. National merit is a huge, awesome honor that comes with great scholarships. So national merit is a great thing to try to work towards, and that's why we recommend that students do prepare for the PSAT for junior year. Even if your student is not going to be super competitive for national merit, and we'll talk about what scores will be competitive for national merit, it's still really helpful to prep for the PSAT because it's good practice. That's really the whole point of the PSAT anyways, is it's good practice towards getting to prepping for the SAT and the ACT. Now, we do want all juniors to take the PSAT. In a lot of states and a lot of schools, it's required. So you'll take the PSAT as a junior in October of your junior year, and then junior year, you really want to figure out, should you be taking the ACT or the SAT so that you can focus on those tests and prepare for them. Then you're going to take the official ACT or SAT as a junior. Typically, we do recommend in spring semester of junior year. So for our juniors out there, that's the semester you're going to want to be taking the test. And that way, if you need to take it again as a senior, as you see in our 12th grade plan, you can take the test again as a senior and still apply to colleges on time. That way you can apply to college and get into the college of your choice. So that is the timeline. So now let's focus on how to interpret your PSAT score reports. We're going to talk about the score reports. You should already have your score report because the scores were released previously. So you should have been able to access your scores in December. And if you don't have them, just definitely check with your guidance school counselor and on the College Board's website. That's where you can access your scores. But let's talk about the purpose of the PSAT so that we can really get that context of what these scores mean. Because I've actually been teaching the ACT, SAT, and PSAT for over 11 years now, and I find that a lot of people don't really fully get like what the PSAT is for. So let's make sure that we have a good understanding of that. The PSAT is a practice SAT. P actually stands for preliminary. So it's just a practice SAT. So in a lot of ways, it can help you figure out, are you scoring on the right track for the SAT and ACT? But also it's just good practice to get that standardized test in so that you're not taking an official standardized test when it's a lot more important and counts a lot more toward your college admissions. Now, we already mentioned before that the PSAT for juniors also is the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. That is also sometimes shown as NMSQT, National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. Again, it's only for juniors. So even if you're a sophomore and you got a perfect score on your PSAT as a sophomore or a freshman, it doesn't get counted into your national merit because it's only for juniors. Now, one thing that's important to know about the PSAT is that it is not for college admissions. Colleges do look to see if you qualified for national merit, but that's less than 1% of all test takers. For everybody else, colleges do not use the PSAT for college admissions. You won't submit your PSAT score. Colleges are going to use the ACT and the SAT to figure out if you should be accepted, along with other things like GPA and extracurriculars and letters of recommendation and what classes you took, and all sorts of other things like that when they're looking at you holistically. So that's really the purpose of the PSAT. So now we want to try to figure out, okay, we get the point of it. It's a practice SAT. It's for national merit. It's not for college admissions or applications. But I still want to know, like, did I get a good score, or how do I know if I'm on track? So let's take a look at the PSAT score distribution. The PSAT is scored from 320 to 1520. And if you know your PSAT scores or your student scores, you can go ahead and chat them to us because we'll be able to actually help you make a customized plan based on your year in school and what you scored. That will help us. So if you want to tell us your scores, we'd love to celebrate your accomplishments so far as well. So again, PSAT is from 320 to 1520, which means that we have a range of 1,200 points. So basically, if your student fills in their name properly, they get a 320, and then there's 1,200 points that they can earn on the PSAT. The 50th percentile score, the median score, which in this case is also the average, is a 920. So one way that you can kind of think about, like, is my score a good score, is whether you scored above a 920. If you scored below a 920, that means that you're in the bottom half of test takers, and it means that you're not going to be as competitive in admissions. So I see some questions like Lyra is asking, if you took the PSAT already as a freshman, could it count towards national merit? And it does not. National merit is only for juniors. It doesn't matter how well you scored freshman year, sophomore year, or if you took it again as a senior, it only counts for juniors no matter what. Awesome, I see Ron got a 1470. Way to go, Ron. That's awesome. Lara got a 1080. Angelina got an 1170. Skytoast 10, 1430 as a sophomore. Way to go. This is awesome. Priyanka is telling us that she got a 1210. These are great, great scores. Thanks for sharing these scores with us. And again, it doesn't matter where you started. What matters is what you can do to get to the score that you really want to achieve on your official PSAT as a junior, and then of course on your ACT and SAT. So we'll talk about a few other ways to assess whether your PSAT is a good score, but before we do that, let's also think about where this score comes from. And it comes from combining two section scores. So there's an evidence-based reading and writing score, which is from 160 to 760, and from math, which is from 160 to 760. So 50% of the score is from math, and 50% of the score is from like verbal, essentially. So that is where your score comes from. And then let's now figure out what is a good score. And I see more people are telling us their scores. So Virginia has a 1270 as a sophomore. We've got the Gelaston is a 1360. We'll talk about national merits cutoffs in a minute. 1310. So great job, guys, on these scores. Thanks for sharing them with us. I appreciate you being so awesome and telling us about this. And we have someone whose son got a 1270. This is fantastic. Okay, so another way to think about is your score a good score is to think about the college and career readiness benchmarks that the College Board issues. So the College Board, which is the maker of the PSAT, has these college and career readiness benchmarks that they've created by doing a ton of research. The ACT does this as well. To figure out if your student gets a certain score, what's the percent likelihood that they're going to get at least a C in their first year college courses? Because colleges really don't want students getting less than a C, right? Like they want to admit students who are going to be successful. And what the test makers have found is that if you, as a 10th grader, get a 430 in evidence-based reading or writing or a 480 in math, that you're on track to have a 75% chance of getting a C or better in your first year of freshman classes. And then for 11th graders, that score goes up. That's because every year they expect that you're going to increase in your knowledge and your skill set, your critical thinking skills, and that you would continue to improve. So that's why they're thinking by the time you get to college, you'd be on track for a C. So you can see, again, it's that 75% likelihood of achieving a C or better in first year college courses. Now, a lot of people want to do a lot better than a C in their first year college courses, but this is just another benchmark to think about. Are you on track? If you are not on track, this would be another place where I would strongly encourage you to start preparing for the PSAT, because our preparation courses don't just help you on the PSAT, they teach you those skills, that critical thinking that you need to be successful. So if you're not hitting those college and career readiness benchmarks, you really want to do some work to get up to them so that you are ready by the time you do get to college, because you do want to be earning at least a C or better in college to be successful there. So this is a really good indicator if you're going to need some prep to get you up to that level. Okay, another way of assessing whether you have a good score is by looking at your overall percentile score. So you guys are telling me, like Deepti just said, she got a 1290 on the PSAT for a sophomore. Maddie said 1270. And so what you can do is compare your score to the percentile ranking. So for example, let's take that 1290 that Deepti told us a sophomore had. So what we can do is look at this chart, and you would have gotten percentile scores from your score report. But we can look at this chart, and for a sophomore, that's a 10th grader, a 1290 would fall above that 95th percentile. That's an amazing score for a 12th grader. And while it's a little bit lower, it's probably going to be just a little bit higher than 90th percentile, probably like a 91st percentile for a 1290 for an 11th grader. That's still also an amazing score. The reason that the score percentile changes from a 10th grader to an 11th grader is because, again, the test maker expects, as do colleges, that you're going to improve in your skills and knowledge as you go through high school and then into college as well. So they expect a little bit less of a 10th grader than they do from an 11th grader. And same thing for 9th graders as well. Now, what really does a percentile mean? So a percentile is the percent of students that you scored better than. So for example, if you scored in the 90th percentile, which actually every single person who wants to even apply to teach for Kaplan has scored at least in the 90th percentile or above. So when you're talking to Heather and Joe and Sasha and Julia and of course myself, you know that we've all at least scored at a bare minimum of the 90th percentile or above, which means that we scored better than 90% of test takers when we took our test, and we're in the top 10% of test takers. Now, for most of our teachers who teach our live online programs like what we're doing right now, we've usually scored in the 95th or 99th percentile. We're in the top 5 and 1% of all test takers in the country. So that's a really helpful way to assess whether you're doing a great job or not. The more, the higher your percentile score, the more competitive that you are as a test taker. Another thing that you can think about is how can you raise your score from percentile to percentile? And so that's something else we'll talk about when we make our test prep plan. The final way that you can really assess, like, did I get a good PSAT score, is national merit. And again, this is only for juniors, but national merit scores ranged in 2016 from 1380 to 1480 for the cutoffs. So the way it works is every single state has a different cutoff score. And generally, the more populated states like California have higher cutoff scores than the less populated states, say Wyoming. So that's why there's a range. The reason that we have the range from 2016 is that the 2017 national merit cutoffs won't be shared until way later this year. So 2016 is the most recent data that anyone has. Literally nobody else has the data for 2017 because it's still being calculated right now and it won't be finished until well into this year. This, though, gives you a great idea of about where you need to score. So you can see, again, the cutoff starts, even for like the least populated states, at a 1380. Let's go back to the previous page for a second. Check out where a 1380 is. So a 1380 is going to be like above a 1350, and it's only for 11th graders, right? National merit's only for 11th graders. That means that in order to qualify for national merit, you need to be scoring well into the high 90th percentiles. You're going to need to be usually around the top 1% or 2% of test takers nationally and the top 1% of test takers in your state. So national merit is extremely competitive, which is why we strongly suggest if you're close to that range, you should really prepare for the PSAT for the next time when you're going to take it as a junior so that you might be able to qualify for a national merit scholarship, because that is one of the most prestigious awards that is awarded to a high school student. Colleges look so favorably on that, and it comes with a ton of scholarship money. And I'm sure everybody would love to have some scholarship money to help pay for college. All right, so that is really how to tell whether you have achieved a strong score on the PSAT. So now let's talk about the PSAT versus SAT, because I see we've gotten some questions about the SAT. So the PSAT is scored from a 320 to a 1520. The SAT is scored from a 400 to a 1600. So there's still a 1200 point range for both of the tests. 1200 points from 400 to 1600 and 1200 points from 320 to 1520. So the difference is that the PSAT score range is just shifted over a little bit from the SAT, and that's because the PSAT is easier than the SAT. So the PSAT is supposed to be a predictor of what you would score on the SAT if you took the SAT on that exact same day. But it's just a predictor, and there's certainly a margin of error, so it's not always 100% accurate. It's just a good indicator of how you would score on the official SAT. So for example, if somebody got a perfect score on the PSAT, they got a 1520, what that would indicate is that they would get a 1520 on the SAT, which is not a perfect score. They'd still have 80 points to gain. So it, again, is just not exactly lined up with the SAT, again, because the SAT is harder than the PSAT, because the PSAT is not for college admissions. It's for 11th graders, 10th graders, 9th graders. It's for practice, the practice SAT. Now, we're going to spend a lot more time talking about the SAT and the ACT, because those are the two tests that your students will want to choose from when trying to apply to colleges. So we have a poll that actually you can vote in about whether you think that your student should take the SAT, the ACT, or both tests. Every college does require that students take either the SAT or the ACT. So we want to try to figure out which one your student should take. Right now, it's looking like no one really is favoring the ACT, really just a very small percentage. About 3% of you are saying the ACT is going to be the better test for your student. A lot of you, like almost 3/4 of you, are saying both. And then about 1/4 of you are saying the SAT. Now, I want this poll to just be our preliminary results. As we talk through this section, I want you to be really thinking about if your answer that you told me just now is really the right answer for you. So I'm going to give you a lot more information about the SAT versus the ACT, and anytime that you think that you want to change your mind, just go ahead and vote in the poll again. Okay, so let's talk about the SAT and the ACT. First of all, Kaplan talks to college admissions advisors every year. We do a huge survey where we talk to a minimum of 300 admissions advisors. Usually it's closer to 500 admissions advisors from all over the country, from all sorts of different schools, state schools, private schools, really small schools, liberal arts schools, really big schools, Ivy League schools, easier to get into schools, every school range. So we have a lot of input from college admissions advisors telling us about how they use the ACT and the SAT and other factors in their admissions process. What we found is that 95% of college admissions advisors are confident that the SAT and ACT are effective tools in measuring students' future success at their school. 95% is a really high percentage, and we also actually even asked about the ACT and the SAT separately. And a lot of people think that the SAT is viewed more favorably by colleges, and that is actually a myth. A lot of colleges, actually every single college will take both the ACT and the SAT. In the past, there were some preferences geographically, it tended to be geographically at least, of the SAT for some schools, and some schools preferred the ACT actually. So years ago, and this was true when I was applying to college, because I'm sure this is shocking to you, but I did not just apply to college last year. So when I graduated high school in 2002, it was true that some schools preferred the SAT and some schools preferred the ACT. So I actually took both tests because I was applying to some colleges in the Midwest. I'm from Chicago. And schools in the Midwest tended to prefer the ACT back then. And I was also applying to schools on the East Coast, including some Ivy League schools. And a lot of the schools on the East Coast that I was applying to preferred the SAT back then. But we've known that for a minimum of 5 years, schools do not have preferences anymore. They think that both tests are equally great, and they recommend that students should take the test that's going to be best for them. So while it might have been true when you applied to college or when your student's guidance counselor applied to college, it is no longer true. We've known this year after year after year. We've gotten the same results that colleges no longer view one test over the other. And a lot of that is because of the tests have changed. So the tests are now much more similar to one another. There are differences, and we'll talk about those in a bit, but colleges really view both tests equally. It doesn't matter what program your student's applying to. It doesn't matter if they're going to be pre-med or they're going to be a journalism major. It doesn't matter if they want to go to the Ivy League school or to a state school. It does not matter. Every school is going to look at the ACT and the SAT the same. So you really want to make sure that your student is taking the test that's going to show their best potential so they can really be competitive in admissions. So now you might be thinking, well, maybe I should just have my student take both tests. So we asked that too. We asked admissions advisors, is there an advantage to an applicant submitting both an ACT and an SAT score? And check this out, 80% of college admissions advisors told us that there's no advantage to submitting both. 2% were not sure. I'm not sure what's going on with them. 18% said there is an advantage, but I want you guys to check out this one other important factor. We did not just ask college admissions officers if there was an advantage to submitting both. We asked them if there was an advantage to submitting both, assuming both scores are strong. So first of all, 80% of admissions advisors said there's not even an advantage assuming both scores are strong. And 18% said there is an advantage assuming both are strong. What we also know is that if your student submits scores for both the ACT and the SAT, and one of the scores is not strong, that's actually more likely to hurt their chances of admission. So it is even more important to really figure out which test is going to be best for your student. Focus on that one test first, and then and only after they've been successful on that test, if they are going to be able to have time to take the other test and still be successful, that's when they could focus on a second test. It's really much better to focus on one test at a time. I see a question about the PSAT and the SAT scores being the same scale. It is a really comparable scale, but is not exactly the same. So again, if whatever score you got on the PSAT should predict your SAT score exactly, but it's not going to, again, there's an 80-point difference on the PSAT because the PSAT is easier. Okay, so if students should not necessarily take both tests, then we should figure out which test they should take. And just one more thing, actually, before we dive into which test students should take, I want you to think about why it makes sense to not focus on both at the same time. So if you're trying to focus on both tests at the same time, let's say that your student has, I'm just going to make up a number, 50 hours to work on preparing for the SAT and the ACT. Let's say they decide they're going to take both tests. So they spend maybe 25 hours on each test. And certainly there's going to be some overlap. Some studying for the SAT is going to help for studying on the ACT and vice versa. But that's going to be just 25 hours per test. Let's even say that it kind of turns out to be like 35 hours per test because of the overlap, right? Now compare that to if your student had spent 50 hours studying the test that they would be better on. That's an additional 15 hours that they studied on the test that's best for them, and you better believe that an additional 15 hours of studying is going to raise their score. They're going to be a lot more competitive if they put all of their efforts toward one test, and then if they achieve a really great score and they can have time to work on the other tests, they can always do that too, and we'll talk about some test prep programs that we have that would allow your students to do that, but it's really best for your students to study for one test at a time, get that really competitive score, and then work forward. So let's talk about which test is going to be best for your student. The key here is that every student is different. Even twins might find that one student's going to be better at the SAT and one student's going to be better on the ACT. So let's make sure that we really think about what's going to be best for your student. Okay, so we'll talk about a bunch of different logistical factors. So the first one is the length of the test. The SAT is 10 minutes longer than the ACT. Now, if this was the only difference, which it's not, there's a bunch of other differences. If this was the only differences, some people are going to say that they'd rather take the SAT because it's longer, which means more time per question potentially. And some people would say the ACT because they're like, I just want to get it over with. I can't focus for that long. So even on something as simple as a 10-minute difference between the SAT and the ACT, that could make a difference on which test is best for your student. So while I don't want you to make a decision on which test to take or which test your student should take based on just the length of the test alone, this is just an example of the kind of analysis that you want to do of these factors that we're going to talk about to figure out which test is going to be best for your student or for you if you're a student. Okay, so that's the length. The next factor is the score areas. So the SAT score areas are going to be the same as the PSAT. So you're going to get that overall score from 400 to 1600 because it's the SAT. And then you're going to get a score on your reading and writing, and you're going to get a score on math. And there's a bunch of subscores as well, but those are really the main scores that colleges are going to be looking at. Now on the ACT, you're going to get your composite score, and then you're going to get scores in the 4 sections. There's English, math, reading, and science. What this means is that on the SAT, 50% of your score comes from math, and on the ACT, 25% of your score comes from math. So you might be thinking, oh, if my student's awesome at math, I want 50% of their score to be from math, SAT, done. Here's the thing, what math content is on the test? They vary from test to test. Are they good at the specific math and the way it's tested on the SAT versus on the ACT? Just because they're awesome at math doesn't mean that their score overall is going to be better on the SAT because potentially their evidence-based reading and writing scores struggle, and that's showing 50% as well, and it brings their overall score down. Maybe because they're awesome at math, they're also awesome at science, and they could also do better on the ACT. So these are all things that you want to think about and not just have a snap judgment. The score ranges, we just talked about the 1200 point range from 200 to 800 per section for a 1600 overall score on the SAT, and then the ACT is scored from 1 to 36 overall with an average from each score of the sections. So you have a 1 to 36 on English, math, reading, and science each, and then that averages out to 1 to 36 overall. That doesn't really factor into whether you should take the SAT or the ACT, but that's just some helpful information for you. Next is the concept of super scoring. So this is going to help you really to decide if you should be focusing on multiple tests. So for the SAT, super scoring is more common than on the ACT. Let me explain what super scoring is. So let's say that the first time that you take the SAT, I'll give you some good scores. Let's say the first time you take it, you get a 700 on reading and writing and a 600 on math. I just gave you a 1300, which is a really great score. Now, the second time that you take the SAT, let's say you flip it. You get a 600 on reading and writing and a 700 on math. Well, to super score it, you would have to submit both sets of scores to schools, and then some schools will super score it, which means they'll take your best score from each test date, and they'll take your 700 from reading and writing the first test, and 700 from math the second test to give you an overall score now of 1400, which your 1300 was already really great, but 1400 is like baller. That's super scoring. Some schools do it, some schools don't. Schools change their policy from year to year. So the only way to know for sure that a school is going to superscore is to call the school or contact the school's admissions committee and find out if they superscore. And that's totally okay to do. Schools won't be like, why are they asking this? That's totally allowed. The ACT is much less likely to be superscored. So even if like one time you take it, let's say like your science score was bringing you down and you had an average of, let's say, a 30, we'll give you another good score, but your science score was like a 26. And then the second time you took it, you also averaged a 30, but this time your science score was a 32, which also means one of your other scores must have gone down, but they really aren't going to superscore it to like bring your overall average up. So it's just something to keep in mind. They will oftentimes they'll look at trends. And again, not all schools will do super scoring at all. Some schools will look at your most recent scores more closely. Some schools are going to just look at your best score. Some schools will super score. Some schools will look at the overall trend. So you don't want to just keep taking the tests over and over and over, because that is also sometimes a red flag to schools. So there's a lot you got to weigh in when making these decisions. So we'll talk about the content of the test as well. So hold tight on the content of the test, so don't worry. Okay, the last thing is the answer, logistically, is the wrong answer penalty. There used to be a wrong answer penalty on the SAT. There's not anymore. The test changed in 2016. There's no longer a wrong answer penalty on the SAT or the PSAT. They both changed in 2016. And so while this used to actually be a pretty legitimate reason to decide the SAT or the ACT, because it was a very different strategy for students. If there was a wrong answer penalty, which means you would get points deducted if you got a question wrong, if there was a wrong answer penalty, you really had to decide, like, should I even answer this question? Like, do I know for sure the answer? Do I know with a great, like, what percentage confidence do I have on this question? That was like a whole, like, mind warp you had to do when you were taking the SAT previously. Probably some of you remember doing that. Whereas on the ACT, there's no wrong answer penalty, and there is no longer one on the SAT. So what that means is you never lose points on either test. You start off with the baseline score. So on the SAT, you get a 400 for writing in your name, and on the ACT, you get a 1. And then for every question that you get right, you start accumulating points. There's no time that you lose points. So it's just like you get enough questions right to raise your score. That's how it works on both tests. So here is my first testing strategy. We do tons of strategies in our classes, but this is a test strategy that's going to work on the ACT, the SAT, the PSAT every single time, which is that you should never, ever leave a question blank. A blank question means you didn't get any points. You can't get points if you didn't answer a question. If you guess, even if you have no idea, you didn't even have time to look at the question, but you just guess, let's say you guess B for Beth, the best answer on the test. So you guess B. You have usually a 25% chance of getting it right. On most questions, there's 4 answer choices. You get a 25% chance of getting it right, and you didn't even read the question. That is going to help you to raise your score. So that's just one test-taking strategy. We have a ton of them at Kaplan. We test them. We have a whole learning science and psychometrician team that helps us to really figure out our best strategies, and that's one of them that we teach our students every single time. So now let's talk about the differences content-wise between the two tests. So we'll start off with the section that's the most similar between the two tests, which is the writing and language section on the SAT, and it's called the English section on the ACT. This is like the section that tests grammar. It's going to be like sentence structure and language use, and are you following grammar rules? That punctuation, stuff like that is going to be tested in writing and language in English. It's really similar on both the SAT and the ACT, so we really don't recommend students pick their test based on this section alone because it's just so similar. This is also one of the sections where studying for one test will definitely help you with the other test. It's really, really similar. Honestly, for most like untrained experts, they would not even be able to figure out which test you're looking at if you just showed them one question. Our Kaplan teachers, of course, could, because we know all the tricks and nuances between the tests, but most people wouldn't be able to tell you which test it is just by looking at one question. Now, the SAT and the ACT both test all the same question types and content areas within this section of the test. The SAT just has a few more questions, like leaning more heavily towards effective language use, and the ACT has more on sentence structure. Again, that's really just not a reason to choose one test over the other. So let's talk about some of the other sections where there are more differences, and we'll go on to reading. We'll kind of do the verbal sections first. So reading on the SAT and the ACT is, again, pretty similar. The SAT has longer, wordier passages, but they do give you more time per question. The ACT has less time per question, so sometimes students feel a little bit rushed, but they also don't have as much to read. Another difference is that while the SAT and the ACT test all the same question types on each test, the SAT has a greater frequency of the higher level question types, and some of them include the synthesis and rhetoric questions. Whereas the ACT, it also has synthesis and rhetoric questions, it just has a higher frequency of the lower level question types, global and detail questions. Part of that is because you have more time on the SAT, so you can think through things more, and you have less time on the ACT, so you can't think through things as much, and that's why it kind of evens out. Now at Kaplan, we do have strategies for every single one of these question types. We have a global strategy, a detailed question strategy, a synthesis question strategy, a rhetoric question strategy. There's other question types as well. We teach our students every single question type and give them a strategy so that they're going to know how to tackle it. As long as we're doing verbal, let's talk about the essay. And I saw Angelina had a question about whether colleges recommend doing the SAT essay. So colleges, about 13% of colleges require either the ACT or the SAT essay. There is not a college that requires like just one or the other. Some colleges will accept the ACT writing portion in place of one of the SAT 2s. Some colleges will do that, but really no college says like you have to take the SAT writing and not the ACT writing. Like that's just not a thing. And when I say writing, I mean the essay. SAT, it's called the essay, and the ACT, it's called the writing section. Now, I said 13% of colleges require it. There are an additional number of colleges that recommend the essay, and if a college recommends that you do something, you should do it. Basically, take it. If they say we recommend, you should do it. That's a requirement. It's just not written that way. Most colleges, by far, most colleges just say the essays are optional. So you don't necessarily have to take the essay. The key is that you can only take the SAT essay or the ACT writing test if you take the whole test. So if you don't know if a college that you're applying to is going to recommend or require it, like you don't know all the colleges that you want to apply to yet, which is totally fine. A lot of times people don't know exactly where they want to apply until into their senior year, but they're already taking the ACT and the SAT sometimes as sophomores, certainly as juniors. They just might not know all the places they're going to apply. That's fine. In that case, we really, really strongly encourage you to take the essay or the writing test, because if you prep, let's say you put in those 50 hours, and again, I just made up a number, but let's say you put in 50 hours towards your ACT, but you don't study for the writing test at all, you don't take the writing test, that's fine. Then a few months later, you get into your senior year and you find out that one of your colleges that you hadn't really explored before is going to be like the best college for you ever, and they require or recommend the writing test. Well, now you got to take it, but you studied for the ACT like months ago. You're going to be kind of rusty on the ACT now. You might have already gotten the score that you wanted, but now you have to submit this entire score because the only way to take the writing test is to take the rest of the test, and you have to submit your whole score to show your writing test score. So now you have to study again. And if your score goes down, colleges are going to wonder what happened. So you really want to make sure that if you're not, unless you're 100% certain that no colleges that you're going to apply to are going to recommend or require the essay or the writing test, you should take it. Now, it doesn't really matter which one you do. You should really just take the one that is going to be attached to the test that you're already focused on. But a few details about them. They're both optional. The SAT is 10 minutes longer than the ACT. The SAT makes you read a source text. It's about 750 words. And then you have to be an objective analyst of that source text. On the ACT, it's a little bit different. You have shorter text to read. That's kind of the theme, right? We said like the reading was a little bit shorter in the ACT than the SAT as well. And then you have to read 3 different perspectives about that short little prompt, and then you have to figure out what your perspective is. So on the ACT, you have to take a stand, and on the SAT, you're being an objective analyst. So it's just a little bit different. The strategies are really similar, and of course, we teach our students how to approach these tests, the essays in their class. We actually have an entire essay grading team that students can submit their essays to, and our highly trained team of teachers will give them a score and suggestions of how to improve. Okay, so that's like the verbal areas of the test and the differences between them. Let's talk about the math and science sections. So math is pretty different. Those 3 sections were pretty similar. Math has a lot of differences on the SAT versus the ACT. So this is where you're really starting to get to like which test you should take. The SAT math has 2 math sections. One is non-calculator and one is calculator. And one is, so without your calculator, you have to just like figure out how to think critically and use your mental math. And then of course with calculator, you can use your calculator, but on the ACT, you can use your calculator the whole time. So for some students, they love the non-calculator portion. They're great at thinking on their feet like that. They don't need the calculator to rely on. And some students freak out when they don't have a calculator. So that can be a factor. Another difference is that on the SAT, there are some questions called grid-ins or free response. This is actually also true on the PSAT. And these questions, the student has to supply the answer. The only thing the student knows is that the answer can't be negative. So it is a positive number or 0, but they don't know anything else. And they have to fill in the answer into a little grid. And so for some students, that's nerve-wracking because they don't have anything to go off of, whereas the ACT, the entire math section is multiple choice. So those are some of the differences like logistically between the 2 tests. But there's also some differences in the content on the 2 tests. And I saw Layra was asking a little bit before about like the SAT maybe having more algebra and the ACT more trig. And so both tests have essentially the same amount of algebra. The ACT does have a little bit more geometry and trigonometry than the SAT. The SAT has a little bit more word problems than the ACT. The SAT's questions tend to be wordier overall than the ACT's questions. There's also some more scientific thinking that gets tested on the SAT math. That's actually because science gets tested throughout the SAT. And that really brings us to our next difference of the SAT versus the ACT, which is the science section. There is no science section on the SAT. It's just tested throughout. So you'll actually see science type questions on the reading section and on the writing and language section of the SAT, but no actual science is tested. It's not asking you like, you know, what happens after you digest food in the stomach, like where does it go next? Like that's not the kind of question that's being asked. It's asking you to do critical thinking and think like a scientist. So you have to do some data analysis. You have to look at graphs and charts and figure out trends, extrapolate information, figure out if an experiment was run effectively. Did they do the proper controls that they needed to? Is the conclusion that was drawn the right conclusion? Or what conclusion should be drawn? Those kinds of scientific thought processes are what is being tested. And that's because colleges really want to know that students are going to have these critical thinking skills when they come to college. So the ACT has an entire section of this, and the SAT, like I said, it spreads it throughout. And there is a science subscore that schools will see with your SAT results. It just doesn't get factored into your overall composite, whereas it does on the ACT. So a lot of times parents and students will say to me, well, okay, my student wants to be pre-med, so they should definitely take the ACT, right? No, they shouldn't necessarily. Or my student is amazing at biology, like definitely have them take the ACT, right? Again, not necessarily. Or my student is terrible at science. They're so afraid of it. They're bad at labs. They hate physics. They should definitely not take the ACT. They should take the SAT, right? And like, again, not necessarily. It doesn't matter what your major is. It doesn't matter what your grades are in your science classes. What matters is how you think. So if you are really awesome at thinking critically like this, the ACT is going to be great for you. And if this is an area where you struggle more, first of all, you might want to prep on it because colleges really care, but the SAT might be better for you. So don't do it based off of like what program you want to apply to, what classes you're already good at. You want to base it off of how you actually do on the test. So one of our other top recommendations is that you want to make sure that you or your student, if you're a parent, take a practice SAT and a practice ACT. And I don't mean the PSAT. That's great. They should definitely take that as well. But I mean a practice actual SAT and a practice ACT. Because with Kaplan, we actually offer these for free. I'm sure one of our awesome teachers will put a link in the chat for you so you can sign up for one of our free ACT or SAT events. Heather's going to take care of it for us. And you're going to be able to sign up for a free practice test that will give you your results immediately so that you can see how you're doing, and you want to compare the percentiles. And that way you can see, are you getting a 55th percentile on the SAT and a 60th percentile on the ACT? The ACT might be better for you. But I also want you to think about not just what your percentile difference is, but where you have more potential. So maybe you got a higher score on the SAT, but you actually feel like, you haven't even learned geometry yet. There's a lot of geometry on the ACT, and you know that once you learn the math, you're awesome at it. And maybe the ACT, it just was fast, but you can speed up. Then maybe even though the first time you took it, the SAT you did better on, maybe in the case I just gave as an example, you'd actually do better on the ACT. You have more potential. So the practice test is just another factor to think about which test is best for you. So I know we just gave a lot of information about which test is going to be best, and the key is to really analyze this information, kind of like that scientific thinking we talked about in the science section. Take a practice test, really evaluate the results, sit down and think about this, get that exposure to these two different tests so that your student can make a really smart decision about which test to focus on. You don't want them to focus on both. That's just going to pull them too thin. Have them focus on one at a time, get a great score, and if they have time, they can work on the next one as well. All right, so that really brings us to our next step of the method from your PSAT score to college admissions, which is to make a test prep plan to get a higher score. So there's a few factors that you want to be looking for in whatever your test prep plan is. You want to make sure that you're addressing these factors. The first one is that you want to have score-raising strategies for the entire test. So I was talking before about how we have overall strategies, like make sure that you answer every single question on the test. We have strategies for each section of the test as well. I was talking about how in the reading section, we have a strategy for every single question type. You want to make sure that whatever test prep plan you are going to use, that you have a strategy to raise your score for every single section of the test. It's really important. This is not the same as taking a high school test. This is going to be a different kind of test, and you want to make sure that you have score-raising strategies all along the way. That's not the only strategy you want, though. You also want to have time management and pacing strategies. And I'd love to know in the chat from all of you if this is an area where you or your student has ever struggled with running out of time or just feeling anxious about the timing of the test. I know a lot of students get a lot of test anxiety because it's a big deal, right? These tests matter so much in college admissions. They're actually one of the top 2 factors that colleges use in admissions. It's GPA and ACT or SAT scores. Those are the top 2 factors colleges look at. So this is a really, really important part of admissions, and that pressure, which students are under so much pressure already, it's a lot of pressure. So a lot of students get really nervous about this, and that's why we also have time management and pacing strategies to help reduce their anxiety. We give them study plans so they know exactly what to do every day. They don't have a lot of time. They're already studying for their high school classes. Most of them have other extracurriculars going on, whether it's sports or clubs or work or helping out at home even, just all the things that they need to do. There's a lot to do. So we want to give them really clear plans of what to do every single day so that they can make the most of the time that they have, and again, reduce their anxiety. And then lastly, you want to make sure that your students are really working on focused practice. So I want to talk about focused and practice. Let's talk about practice first. Practice is just they should take practice tests. Kaplan has 8 practice tests for each the ACT and for the SAT. Full-length practice tests. We want these tests to be realistic, right? You want to make sure that when you're taking a practice test, it really mimics what the actual test is going to look like. That's really important. Yeah, I can see a lot of you guys are saying you've struggled with running out of time. Isa is saying that, and Angelina, sometimes you run out of time towards the end of the section. And the thing is that taking these practice tests can help you with that, and using our timing and pacing strategies will help you with that, because we're going to show you that actually sometimes the last questions in the section are the easiest ones to do, and if you leave them or you didn't get to read them, you're just kind of leaving some points on the table. So we're going to help you figure out how to answer the questions in the most strategic way for you so you can earn your highest possible score, and that you'll practice those strategies in your practice. Now the other part is your focused practice. Focused is that making sure that you're working on the areas that you need to work on. So let's say that in math, you get your test results and it shows you that you really struggled in functions and irrational numbers, let's say. Well, functions are worth a lot more points on both the ACT and the SAT than irrational numbers. You're most likely only going to see like a question or two at the most on irrational numbers, and you're going to see a lot of questions, like 6 or more on functions. Well, that means that if you're struggling on one of those areas or on both of those areas, you should be working on functions, like a lot. That's a lot of points you're leaving on the table with functions. So at Kaplan, we have resources that are focused. We're going to show you, first of all, which areas you need to work on, and then we're going to recommend specific resources. We have workshops about functions. We have special online videos. We have chapters in your book about functions. We have a quiz bank where you can work on just the function questions and practice those, and we're going to keep giving you feedback on how you're doing. We have that for all the different content areas. I'm just using functions as an example, but we would recommend to students like work on functions, and that way you can raise your score even more. All right, I see Reiki is saying like, DA Kent 22 is saying to work on grid-ins first. Actually, some people find it's better to not work on grid-ins first. So it really varies from student to student, and we will help everyone with their strategies as well. Yeah, I know, Reiki, it can be really hard to squeeze time in, and that's why you really want to make sure that you're studying not just harder, but smarter. That's why these strategies are so important. So let me talk to you about one of the resources that my students most love with our Kaplan classes. It's called the Channel, and the Channel is essentially like Netflix for the ACT and the SAT. So I'm sure all y'all are binging something on Netflix or Hulu or Prime or something. Everyone, or even on demand, you've got some way that you're watching your shows. I'm mostly a Netflix girl. We have essentially Netflix for the ACT and the SAT, and it's for all of our Kaplan students. So any of our students who are enrolled in the class, they get access to the Channel. What the Channel is episodes of content focused on different areas of the ACT and the SAT. So we have, for example, lessons on like super specific math topics like trigonometry and scatter plots. We have more broad math topics like back to the basics, math foundations. We have stuff not just on math, of course. We have essay help. We have reading, writing, science. On the ACT, we have every section of the test. We have overall strategies. We have study planning help. We have over 30 hours of programming for the ACT and for the SAT separately. So that way your student can really figure out what they want to watch. And if you think about it, like most TV shows, they're going to be like on Netflix, let's say, they're like a dozen episodes. Maybe if it's like a drama, it's an hour. That's 12 hours of programming. You'd have to have 3 seasons to get to the over 30 hours. We have over 30 hours of ACT and of SAT. There's a lot of programming. That's over 60 hours total. That's going to be like over 5 seasons of a show. That's a lot that your students can work through and really pick out which ones they want to watch. Now, the other reason that my students love the Channel is because we only have episodes that other students love and taught by teachers that students love. So for example, in this image, you can see it's a little screenshot of the SAT Channel, and Heather, who is chatting with us today, she is one of the teachers on the SAT and ACT Channel. It's because she was rated by students as being one of our best teachers at Kaplan, a really enjoyable teacher who helps her students learn. And those are the kinds of teachers that we have on the channel. So you know that this is going to be something that your student is going to love, and it comes with all of our Kaplan classes. So let me talk a little bit more about our prep options. Now, if you are a freshman or a sophomore or a parent of a freshman or a sophomore, you might want to be thinking about PSAT prep first before ACT and SAT prep. So for PSAT prep, we have 4 options. We've got our prep classes. A class is going to have a set schedule. Your student will attend live, either in person or online. They'll get the books, they'll get all of our online resources, they'll get our practice tests, our workshops and quizzes online, everything that they need to study for the PSAT. That's our prep option. That starts at $4.99 for PSAT. We do also have a self-paced option if your student is going to be better at like going at it on their own. That is all the same resources that come with our prep class. It just does not include a teacher. Though we do have access to teachers via email. There's just no set schedule. It's really more for self-motivated students. We have private tutoring, which is kind of the opposite of self-prep. That's where you're meeting with your teacher one-on-one. I know Julia and Joe, who've been chatting with you guys today, they are amazing tutors that work with all sorts of students, PSAT, ACT, SAT students. And they could definitely answer some questions about private tutoring for you. But the number one thing I really want to recommend for freshmen and sophomore parents, and I did see Julie was asking, like, what can freshmen do to prepare for the test? My number one recommendation for freshmen and sophomore parents is unlimited prep. This program has everything that your student needs from PSAT through college admissions, which was our goal for today. Again, I'm recommending this most for freshmen and sophomores. Juniors, I'll get to you in a second. The reason I recommend this for freshmen and sophomores is because unlimited prep includes a PSAT course, an SAT course, and an ACT course all in one. And I said a course, but I actually mean as many times as you want to take it. So you can actually take the PSAT course as many times as you want, the SAT course as many times as you want, and the ACT course as many times as you want, starting the day you enroll today all the way through December of your senior year, because that's the last time you can take the ACT or the SAT and apply for college out of high school. So if you're a freshman, that means you could be getting resources for almost 3 years, and sophomores for almost 2 years, and it's one price. It's $15.99. It comes with all of the resources that you could possibly want all the way through December of your senior year. You don't get charged every year. It's one price the whole time. That's why it's our number one recommendation for freshmen and sophomore. The reason it's $15.99 is because it adds that PSAT course, which is $4.99, plus ACT and SAT prep. Let's take a look at those. ACT and SAT prep is $8.99. So your unlimited prep class, that's $8.99 for ACT, $8.99 for SAT, $4.99 for the PSAT, plus you have unlimited amount of time that you can take the test. So again, unlimited prep is our number one recommendation for freshmen and sophomore. It's a great, great deal, and it's going to give you everything that you need. You literally shouldn't have to spend another dollar on anything prepping for PSAT, ACT, or SAT when you do unlimited prep. Now for my juniors, you don't have quite as much time. So for juniors, I typically most recommend our prep option. This is for juniors for ACT or SAT. You want to choose which tests you're going to take, and you want to get started prepping on that pretty much right away, because you want to be taking your ACT or your SAT this semester. The reason you want to take it this semester is because if you don't get the score you want to have time to study again. And we actually have a great bonus for you for coming today. We have a deal off of our prep courses. This is for prep only. The unlimited prep is already a deal, so we don't have a code for that. But for our juniors, you can use the code PREP250 to get $250 off live online, which is kind of like what we're doing now. Our live online classes are a little bit more interactive than what we're doing right now. And then if you want to take an in-person class, that's going to be $200 off in person if you use the code PREP200. These codes are good for 7 days. So you can use them online on our website, or you can call our admissions enrollment counselors for Kaplan at 1-800-CAP-TEST. You can do that as well. And of course, Joe and Julia and Sasha and Heather will be happy to help you figure out which program is best for you as well. In fact, Heather will probably put in the chat a link that if you want to sign up for a one-on-one time to talk with a teacher to figure out what the best option is for you, you can do that as well. Now, I was talking about like if you had to take the test again. So let's talk about your test prep plan. So you really want to figure out when you're going to be ready to take your test, and you want to take the test when you are ready. But let's say that you took the test and you didn't get the score that you wanted. Well, with Kaplan, if you took one of our courses and you took the test and you didn't raise your score, we will actually give you your money back. We know that our program works. We guarantee that you are going to get a higher score when you use one of our programs. So that's like a really great insurance on your investment that this is going to work for you. But that's not enough. We also want you to get a high score and be ready and really put your best foot forward so that you're going to be competitive in college admissions. So what we also will say is that if you raise your score, but it's not as much as you think you could raise it, or you just want to raise it even more, we'll let you take the course again for free. So that's for our prep courses. So for example, I had a student who studied in an SAT course with me it was about a year ago now. She was taking the March 2017 SAT, And she came in with an 81st percentile score, which is a great score, but she wanted to raise her score a bunch. She raised it all the way to the 94th percentile, and she had been studying a long time before that without Kaplan and really wasn't getting those increases, but she got to 94th percentile in her class with me. But she was like, Beth, I really think I could do better. And I was like, Lindsay, I think you can too. Like, we were looking at her results and we figured out some areas where she could study and do more. So she decided to take the course again for free over the summer, because also she wants to go to Dartmouth. So she just submitted her applications to Dartmouth, and she raised her score even more over the summer. And she was able to do that by using our guarantee and studied again for free. So that's just another awesome option that we have. Now, of course, after you make your test prep plan, you want to apply to colleges, and one fun fact that we have at Kaplan is that 9 out of 10 Kaplan students get into one or more of their top choice colleges. That's why we know that this 5-step plan, getting you from your PSAT to college admissions, we know it's going to work. And I know that you might be like, there's fine print on this slide, like what does that say? I would love for you to read that fine print. It actually tells you that for the past 5 years this has been true. 9 out of 10 Kaplan students get into one or more of their top choice colleges. This is awesome. By helping students prepare for their tests, we're giving them college preparation skills. We're helping them to evolve their critical thinking. We give them advice on what to do in their applications, and we just help set them up for success. And that's going to be really helpful to your student, whether they're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. So with that, I just want to thank you for attending and remind you that we have other events. So hopefully if you have not had your student take a practice SAT or ACT, you should definitely have them sign up for that. We also have some free prep weeks coming up. So next week, I'll actually be hosting a lot of these events in January for the SAT free prep week. That we have going on next week, and then we have one for the ACT in February, and then stay tuned for later this year. We're going to be doing an AP review weekend as well on some specific AP tests. So we've got a lot to help you out, and we just really want to make sure that we're helping your students reach their best potential so that they can get into the colleges of their choice. Thank you all so much for coming. Also put the codes back up on the screen in case you were wondering. And if you guys have any other questions, please definitely let us know. If you have questions. DA Kent 22, I'm so glad that you were able to learn a lot today. Thanks for coming. Yeah, and I see Heather is answering Bill's question about how frequently we have classes. So we have so many different schedules that you can choose from. All of our classes for our prep courses for ACT and SAT are 6 sessions of 3 hours each, but they can meet once a week, twice a week, even 4 times a week. So you just really want to find a schedule that's going to be best for your student. I typically recommend spreading your schedule out as much as possible. So I actually really like teaching the once-a-week classes because it's the same amount of content, whether it's a once-a-week class or a 4-time-a-week class. So I like to have in my once-a-week classes more time for my students to get into more of those resources, take advantage of the channel, work on those special customized Q banks that we have. So I actually have an SAT class coming up this month for any of you who have junior students that are thinking about the SAT. I'd love to have them in my class, but we have tons of amazing teachers that can help you out, whether you're taking the ECT, SAT, or PSAT. Awesome. We do have prep for AP. We don't have the same kind of like full course experience that we do for ACT and SAT and PSAT. We do offer specific AP prep, and you can find out more about that on our website as well. Radha is asking about the unlimited prep option, including in-person, and it sure does. You can take unlimited prep in person or live online or combo them. So maybe your student's like, you know what? It's winter. I don't want to go outside as much, so I don't want to go in person. I'll do my winter classes online, and then when it's nicer, I'll do them in person. You can totally do that. You can kind of go back and forth, which is also totally fine. Great. Well, if you do have any other questions, definitely let us know, and we'll stick around to help answer. But thank you all so much for attending today. Hope this was really informative and that you have a great, clear plan on what to do to get from your PSAT scores to college admissions, and we are so excited to be there to help you all along the way. Thanks again, and we hope to see you soon in the Kaplan classroom. Have a great night.